Right, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Rafe Smith. I hope you are managing to see us now. We've got a fantastic discussion, a very timely discussion about planning and transport that is showcasing the work of the Foundation for Integrated Transport with some of the projects from that FIT has funded from Chris Church, David Milner, and also Jenny Raggett, who is from Transport for New Homes, who will be responding to what David from Create Streets and Chris from Oxfordshire will be saying. So I'm just going to move over to some slides. So bear with me while I try to share my screen.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully you can now see my screen. Jenny, can you give me a thumbs up, or David, if excellent. So just a couple of minutes about the Foundation for Integrated Transport. It was established in 2014 by the late Dr. Simon Norton, a mathematician and transport campaigner from Cambridge. And his vision was a world where people have the right to get around without a car. People can travel with a minimum negative impact on others' lives and the natural environment. And that would be through trains and buses being integrated and improved alongside walking and cycling. And a key part of that was the barriers to transport justice being removed, including through volunteering and social enterprise. So FIT is about promoting radical change for sustainable transport. We've seen places like Scotland and London having great ambitions, but sometimes struggling to shift the dial on modal shift. And FIT is trying to add value by changing that, supporting a range of initiatives, as you can see from our list of priorities there. Now, FIT offers four types of funding. First of all, grants for projects that promote sustainable transport, and two of the bodies that we've funded will be speaking in a moment. We also offer small grants for smaller, more local groups. And then thirdly, we offer fellowships to develop remarkable activists and researchers. And then finally, FIT has a form of social investment in projects that might have a commercial return. And the funding of the current financial year is on projects that deliver motor traffic reduction. And there's a sub-theme of meaningful public engagement in projects that do that. So just a few of our past and present grantees. You can see there's quite a lot of different logos here, including some of the people we'll be hearing from in a moment. So without further ado, I think we're going to start with Chris from Oxfordshire, who's going to be telling us about how he's helped stop a damaging road scheme that has been that was justified on the need to unlock housing development and the alternatives that he and his local group have been proposing. And one theme I'd like to think about through this seminar is that the new government has made both modal shift a priority, but also unlocking 1.5 million homes. So how can we bring those two things together? How can we show that we can shift housing from road oriented to public transport oriented while still keeping or increasing, in fact, the number of homes that are delivered during this Parliament? And so very much looking forward to Chris to telling us about what he's done in Oxfordshire. We'll then go to David from Create Streets, and then Jenny from Transport for New Homes will respond before we open the floor to questions. So over to Chris.
Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Chris Church. I'm from the Oxfordshire Roads Action Alliance, and I am just starting to share my screen. I hope people can see that. Someone give me that okay? Okay, so the Oxfordshire Roads Action Alliance primarily campaigning against one road, but also focusing on the need for better and new development models. Our challenge really is that we are in an interesting situation where major schemes being cancelled, but a lot of the road schemes we're talking to people about are under the not with DFT. Ours is funded mostly by the Housing Infrastructure Fund. And sadly, Rafe said we've stopped it. We haven't stopped it yet. But 5 years ago, we did have a major success with the No Expressway Alliance that saw the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway cancelled. And that gave local groups a big boost. And a lot of those groups engaged very heavily with Oxfordshire County Council's local transport and connectivity plan, which I will come back to. So our challenge now, or previously, is that the same county council has a road scheme, HIF1 as it's known, connecting the A34 going south from Oxford to the Oxford to Reading Road, proposed under the Conservatives 6 years ago. It's taken a while to come through. It's presented to the people at Didcot as solving their traffic problems, but since it will put several thousand new cars on the road every day, it's hard to see how it actually will do that. And it will have massive impact on local villages north of Oxfordshire, where the parish councils are actively opposing it with us. Massive new road bridge over the Thames, and the Lib Dems and the Greens and Labour agreed the LTCP, which states quite clearly that new roads are not a sustainable solution. So the county council says, unfortunately, this road, it's a legacy of the previous administration, and it's essential because the district councils need to have land for new housing. I'm sure we're all aware of this issue. So it's something they're not very happy about, but they see it as necessary. And our job has been to say it's not, and there are better ways of doing this. Our campaign has focused on environmental and economic issues. We, the county council, will need to borrow a lot of money to supplement the HIF grant. And throughout the discussion, there has been no proper consideration of alternatives. Consultants who designed the route looked at a bunch of alternatives and dismissed them pretty much out of hand. We are still stuck on Computer Says Road. And a lot of the local parish councils are saying there has to be a better way. They've got engaged. They haven't always agreed about everything, but one of the points about the alliance is that there is a common ground that says we need a better way forward. So it's worth considering where we are, because the county council is our transport manager, and here they have their hierarchy with walking at the top, motorised modes down the bottom, a target to replace or remove 1 out of 3 car trips. It's ambitious. It's a great thing on paper and in theory. The reality, if it happens, is a bit different. This will be far and away the largest expenditure on transport in the county, around about 400 million now, and that will be the centrepiece of it, a massive new bridge over the Thames. And yeah, again, very little evidence of alternatives. So we've been moving forward. Last year, we had a success when the County Council's own planning committee turned down the County Council's own application. After a 2-day hearing, they upgraded the planning committee hearing because 20 people wanted to oppose it. And this left the county's economic development people and their cabinet deeply unhappy. They were more relieved when 2 weeks later, the plan was called in by Michael Gove. Fairly unusual after a rejection like this, but some of the larger employers in the area appear to have been behind that. Even more interesting, it went back to the planning committee with rather different members a few months later, and they got a different result, which meant that when they went to the public inquiry earlier this year, they were in a position not opposing it, and their economic development team were promoting it. And again, we were struggling all the way through to make the case for better alternatives. And that's moved forward. We had the public inquiry from February to April. It's fair to say we had a barrister, we had some money, but we were outclassed, if you like. County Council had a lot of staff there and spent millions on the inquiry. And one of the key interesting points is that the inspector refused to allow additional evidence around a challenge to a transport modelling used, and suggested that if that was to come in, then there might be costs on the objectors. We are awaiting the report there, wait and see what happens. Obviously, things have changed. First point of changing times is that we need to do this. And we've held a seminar a couple of months ago with Create Streets, where we had a lot of different organisations and a good turnout of councillors. The problem is those councillors are the ones who are on side, including some of the ones who objected, who threw out the objection in the first place. But a great many district and county councillors have been told there is no alternative. And I think if we are going to deal with that question that Rafe proposed about how do we go forward with nature and climate and development, we have to tackle the mindset that says the road is, the way forward. And we should recognise that Oxford is under huge pressure. Biotech, high tech, new jobs pouring in to the area, startups everywhere, population growing. And we were told HIF1 would be the last road scheme. We now have a new relief road for Watlington off to the right of that circle. And there's no evidence really that the growth will do anything other than bring more new roads, more cars, more congestion. So how do we deliver that? Well, the County Council, of course, knows that change is necessary. This is from presentation on their rail strategy, talking about mobility hubs, integrating buses, all the things that FIT likes, and a lot of things that we like. As I say, the problem being their major expenditure is the new roads. So the major point about changing times, we've seen Arundel and Stonehenge go. It's not that dissimilar to what started to happen in '97. People remember the collapse of the last roads programme. Let's wait and see what happens. We don't know. They've said, I think people may correct me if I'm wrong, but the Department for Transport will consider all smaller DFT funded projects as well as big ones. But things funded through CHLG and HIF, well, that's still up in the air. We need concerted action really to show what needs to happen. And I think we are at a tricky position. This is the open letter sent at the end of July, shortly after the election, by Steve Reed at DEFRA and Angela Rayner to all the environmental NGOs, whoever they are. Nature recovery as a top priority alongside overhauling the planning system, growing the economy and reaching net zero. This is not a matter of choosing one of these priorities over another. That's quite a challenge. I'm not convinced that any government anywhere has actually managed to do all those things side by side. But if we're serious about sustainable development and getting to net zero, then we have to do that. So I think the bottom line for us is that we are desperate to see alternatives, light rail, better active transport, better design of new housing in the places where it can work with public transport. We all know all these answers. And the status quo is not working. So we have worked with Create Streets and we will look forward to doing that again. So I'm very keen to hear what David has to say. And we know what a sustainable transport policy looks like. It's we asked Father Christmas for it a few years ago there. And thank you very much, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. That was a really fascinating presentation, highlighting as ever the gap between the kind of the green commitments and then the business as usual delivery. Yes, you did stop it, but it seems to have come back. It seems that's a problem with road schemes, is that campaigners do sometimes manage to stop it, and then the system finds a way to bring it back. I mean, we've had the wrong sort of snow on railways stopping trains, but here we've got the wrong sort of reconsideration, kind of restarting the
Just
road.
one point. If this road did get built, the connection on the Oxford Reading Road would be just 6 miles from the M40, and there would probably be huge pressure for a connecting road through villages such as Garsington, and that would then be pretty much the southern half of the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway that we thought we'd stopped 4 years ago. Many people see this as the expressway by stealth.
So it's even worse than I said, rather than just not being able to stop some roads, it's that there's always another bit of road that will come after it. And one thing you said, Chris, was about it being unclear if the Department for Transport's infrastructure review will cover local road schemes. Yeah, we don't know this, and this is a worry. But one thing you said, Chris, that really struck me was how the inspector refused to allow additional evidence on transport modelling. And I think this is a great kind of segue to the fantastic work David from Create Streets has done along with Sustrans to try to say that actually modelling shouldn't just dictate, and we should actually try to have a different vision rather than being pulled into a kind of a predict and provide approach. So David, over to you now. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about alternatives and your approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, hopefully everyone can see my slides there. So I've got, I think it's about 10 minutes and quite a few slides. What I might do is just skip through a few because I realise we've got, I can't see sort of who's in the audience, but I realise we've got a very informed audience here. So for those that didn't know, a few years ago, we wrote a paper called Computer Says Road, which was really diving into a critique of how transport modelling is affecting house delivery and master planning and town building, as we like to call it. And this had really interesting pickup, obviously with transport experts, but trying to link together the housing and transport communities. That then led to this project, Stepping Off the Road to Nowhere, which you just described, supported by the FIT and Rhys Jeffries Foundation, alongside Sustrans, where we thought, okay, we're going to bring together some transport specialists, especially out to travel, transport for new homes, and Jenny was involved as well, and then Create Streets with our understanding of master planning and place would come together to look at a real example of what we believe was a really damaging road scheme, which was another HIF scheme around Chippenham and the delivery of 7,500 new homes. So, and absolutely, you know, if we're going to talk about town building, this is absolutely it. And how no one really seemed to be too happy with this. How can we use this infrastructure funding, in this case, £75 million road, to build the same number of homes, potentially could even build more, on less land, and to get better health, happiness, economic, and transport outcomes? In terms of the past and predict and provide, I suspect a lot of people have good knowledge of the way that a lot of schemes have been planned and still are planned nowadays, which is primarily justifying economic value and benefit through time saving to individual journeys. And what we found is that essentially you predict transport growth, you predict economic growth, you predict worsening road conditions, and therefore you end up building these roads and you build this infrastructure, and then clearly with induced demand you end up filling all of these roads. And even if you don't, the only types of housing developments and housing pattern that you can actually build are, you know, big. You know, you've all seen the kind of flags off a main road going into a big cul-de-sac and a bunch of homes with no businesses, no shops. It's no sense of this being a place or a town. So it does become a self-perpetuating theme. And we get more developments like this. You see big expressways, roundabout junctions into a load of housing. And it builds some homes. It builds some homes at pretty low density. It probably won't make too much of a dent in the housing crisis, which we are in, especially in the southeast. So we're looking towards what's known as a vision-led future, and I think this ties in quite nicely to the missions which are talked about by the government as well. Skimming through this, because again, I think with an informed audience, we know some of the damaging issues of new roads. We're not saying you can never build a new road, because you need to cycle on roads, buses go on roads, but it's about that being the only solution. And we're really interested in saying, okay, we can build some new, what we like to call streets, but actually, how can we put the right public transport, the right taxi travel, but also how do we put the right facilities, the right schools in the right place, shops and offices and commercial in the right space, such that actually more people are living in a mixed community where they have more choice. There's a nice little flow chart, I think, for the predict and provide sort of world that we live in, looking at existing travel, forecasting for growth, forecasting future car travel. You sort of plug in historic data, and if you plug in the historic data, you're obviously going to sort of keep getting the same mistakes of the past. And we're not very good at prediction. As you can see, the black line is the reality, and all the projections going from the 80s through to the 90s through to the noughties are all going up, and yet the black worm is staying fairly level. So I think it's just worth acknowledging we're not very good at this. This was the scheme we were looking at. I think my mouse will come across here. So you can see really quite an enormous land take. And then we had 3 options for a big road. And you know that if you're going to have this as a bypass road, it's going to be very difficult to cross this road. It's going to be a huge severance, not the kind of road that you actually want going through the middle of a town extension. So we ran workshops, we visited Chippenham, we spoke to some, not, we can always speak to more, but we spoke to some range of local councillors, range of local activists, range of local active travel campaigners and experts, and then ourselves, Transport for New Homes and Sustrans, looked spatially at Chippenham and we asked the question, how would you provide these new homes in a better way? And we led to a number of what we call big moves. Everything from the master plan through to how we might support brownfield growth, through to rail, buses, car clubs, local businesses, supporting high street renewal, and also building some new roads and new streets. So let's take these big moves one by one. I think I'm halfway through my time. So, and this is all online and free. So if I skim through very quickly, please go and have a look at the report. So the first thing, and I think the most important thing, is get the master plan right. We can see in yellow is the Create Streets master plan. In red was the existing master plan for 7,500 new homes. It's worth saying that this master plan hasn't really gone forwards anywhere. The numbers have reduced massively. Some people might be happy about that, but really, the reality is it's not helping to solve the housing pressures, and nor is it helping to solve some of the transport pressures in the local areas. I think residents from Berkshire would accept. So the big stats on this master plan is it's reducing 358 hectares to 120 hectares, which is quite a bold reduction in density. However, we're not talking about anything too high, and I think this is the natural response you might get is, okay, well, we don't actually want massive towers in Chippenham. It's not the right kind of development. We actually took the density of the existing town centre of Chippenham and some of the the immediate, what would have been called the suburbs around Chippenham. And we've replicated those densities, around about 50 to 60 homes per hectare, which is the sort of industry standard. And that's basically, a few more terraces, maybe the odd 3-4 story apartment blocks, and more semi-detached housing. It might be slightly tighter back-to-back distances, so slightly shorter gardens for some. And it might be that we don't have sort of, big sprawling, open spaces dividing us from the rest of the development. We're really trying to talk about the organic growth of Chippenham. Almost all the new homes are within 2.5 kilometres of the station. Half of the homes less than 1.5 kilometres away, onto an existing cycle track. And we propose linking to a second cycle track. They're actually very well served out to the east. We're looking at more shops in the master plan, more amenities for what frankly is an enormous population growth of Chippenham if it was to go ahead. And I think something that's undervalued is if you build your new development a little bit tighter to the existing town, it means that everyone's journey to nature and to the countryside is going to be shorter. If you build the red splodges across here, actually, if I live in some of the existing development, I've now got quite a few kilometres maybe to walk to access the existing countryside. So I think that's one of the benefits to existing users. And because, as you'll see, we really dialed up the public transport, we could then reduce slightly. We didn't get rid of it. We reduced slightly the number of parking spaces for cars because we're using a lot of car clubs, using a lot of active travel, using a lot of buses, and improving the trains. So that actually saved, I think we've got here from 28 hectares to 11 hectares, with enough for 850 homes or 20 small parks. So this is the bit more detail on the master plan. I'll just skip forward there, conscious of time. And we're big believers in visuals. I really liked Chris's presentation because he just showed you what this road would look like. And a road is different to a road, is different to a road, is different to a road. It's very easy to see when is this a street, when is this unlocking new access, or unlocking new homes, or when is this really about optimizing journey times for people traveling through. And we believe the same in buildings. When we say gentle density, let's put a picture and say this is what we mean. Big move 2, we were looking at using some of this existing 75 million would have just gone to one road to encouraging and essentially supporting some brownfield homes, so slightly bumping up that brownfield remediation fund. Big move 3, which is very exciting, was looking at the rail links from Chippenham. So Chippenham's on the high-speed train line, well, probably not technically high speed, but it's on the fast train line. That does mean that local services are constrained. So if you want to go north and south to where we're talking about Trowbridge to Melksham, probably up to Swindon as well, I think you're around about 6 trains per day. I've almost got these figures here in my brain. Jenny will jump in if I'm wrong here. You're about 6 trains a day, which is really hard for you to build a commute around or for you to build a lifestyle around. We looked at a rail passing loop in Melksham, which is basically a little lay-by for trains. And that would mean that you can now run local services. You could run up to 4 per hour. Now, clearly, you've got operating costs, but that's small, and it was 15 million here. I think we've learned since there might be a lot less, actually, and you could do this more cheaply. That could unlock rail capacity north and south, and not only benefit benefit the new residents that would go into this new development, but the existing residents of Chippenham as well. Number 4 is improving streets in the new development. So that's basically roads. Again, we're not saying don't build any roads. We're just saying don't put all your eggs into one basket. Big move 5, we spoke to local authority officials about what the gold-plated bus solution was for Chippenham, and there's a big sort of strategy, big document. We said, okay, well let's fund the capital costs and 5 years of the revenue costs for that bus service to get it on its feet and to get some houses built out in the new development, and that will then provide more of a revenue. Some money towards car clubs and mobility hubs. I'm sure you've heard of Como UK, and you've heard of some of the really exciting stuff they're doing around shared vehicles, mobility, and car clubs, and how that car club might replace your 3rd or your 2nd car. Big move 7 was, and I think this is a really exciting one. It's a model that was used in Poundbury, which is if you build new shops and services very early on in the development to create your centre, you need some passing trade before the homes are built out. If you sort of leave that to the existing market, it's sort of natural that you'll put this as a lay-by. So it's almost like a town centre on the existing road as you build your homes out. However, if you can subsidise those shops and services, you can then master plan them in the right place for the long term, such that 20 years down the line, when you've built all 7,500 homes, the shops, the town centre can be in the centre, not on the existing road. So we think it's really, this is a really big transport move, is to actually support the location of services. Big move 8, I think if you're going to grow Chippenham by 7,500 homes, you absolutely should be investing in your town centre. It's a really lovely high street. It could be lovelier. They, clearly crying out for a little bit of investment. This development could contribute to that and really provide an attractive and exciting and enjoyable alternative to people driving to out-of-town centres. So, the more that we can encourage people to go and visit the centre of their towns, the more that we don't generate as many vehicle trips. And then 9, obviously, we had some expert working with Sustrans and some great designs here, was investing in a really, really high class active travel scheme. So we looked at the trip generators, and we looked at assessing the network. How would you improve it? Where would you segregate it? Where would you have a sort of totally off road cycle tracks? Where could you create quiet ways? And we sort of put, I think it was 15 million towards the active travel scheme. And then I think is the exciting bit, and Rafe, hopefully I'm all right on time. I think I've got a couple of minutes left. Thank you. Is we got in touch with a group called Integrated Transport Planners. They're a fantastic transport planning consultancy, and they basically offered us for free, so very kind shout out to them, to do to sort of run their vision-led transport model on this scheme. So we looked at 4 key measures: safe walking and cycling, demand management, public transport, and then placemaking. You know, where is stuff in the right place? So if you put stuff in the right place and you mix it up, you have the skeleton of an accessible or walkable place. I'm not going to dive into each box, don't worry, but we essentially graded each of our moves against this public transport, walking, cycling, demand management, and placemaking planning methodology. And we come back to modeling here. And just to sort of say, I'm not totally anti-modeling. I'm just saying, let's do it better. Let's do it much more transparently. And let's do a model as opposed to a prediction, if that makes sense. So they are looking at real life towns and cities across Europe, and places that do walking and cycling really well, places that do public transport really well, places that do that have 50-minute cities that mix things up in the right way. And then we said, how far do we think our measures go to achieving some of those gold standard or silver standard solutions, to then model what would that look like with 7,500 new homes. Hopefully I'm not throwing too many numbers out here, but the headline from their model was that the original 7,500 home red blob master plan spat out about 72% of all trips being private car. With our model, we got that down to 46%. So we didn't sort of, there's some very punchy TCPA targets around it being 40%. We've got to acknowledge Chippenham does not have a huge metro system right now. Our development can only go so far, but I think that's actually a really impressive. Again, it's modelled, so I'll caveat, but a really impressive outcome on that sense. Because of the improvements we made to the existing transport infrastructure, be it the buses, be it the trains, we looked at 5 to 10% decrease in total background traffic. That led to 12,000 fewer car trips every day. So we're really trying to tackle congestion, which is understandably a real annoyance of people that live in Chippenham and surrounding villages. More people walking and cycling, 2,000 tons fewer carbon emissions, enormous amount of fewer carbon emissions, probably if you look at most local plan strategies, and 3,000 more public transport users per day, which only sort of helps to build that reinforcing cycle. I'm going to sort of sum up there, because we probably want to get on to Jenny's response and some questions. Sort of vision and validate, known as vision-led, that's the buzzword you might keep hearing. That's, for me, about organic growth of towns, more homes, but with less roads, more walkable, more connected, more economically successful on the left. Or you can have this prediction-led world, which pushes things apart. It will take more land, and it's not going to drive some of that local agglomeration. And very quickly, whilst Chris is speaking, I think we also want to talk about the impact of these projects that are so kindly supported. There is an NPPF consultation out right now. It was very exciting news. If we look at if we look at transport and infrastructure, in that the consultation now has stated, you can see point 7, planning for travel to offer and follows predict and provide, insufficient regard for places, where places are designed on a worst case peak hour scenario, and they want to drive forward to its vision-led future. So I think there's some really exciting stuff. Please go and respond to that consultation. It's live at the moment. I think it closes fairly soon, and support some of the vision-led measures. Right, I'll stop sharing there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David. That was really inspiring and fascinating. And just a quick question before I hand over to Jenny. I mean, you mentioned the access to nature, more walking to the station. Are the health benefits there? Were they valued? Is anything about less impact, less demand on local doctors? Because that's often a concern for people facing new housing developments.
In short, I can say no. There's only so much I think we bit off almost too much that we can chew already, and I know the team put an enormous amount of work to this one. There's so much we'd love to do with this. I think there's so much that people in the audience could pick up and run with. Valuing health would be fantastic. We really are trying to move away from the kind of what's the right word? The legacy BCR methodology. So if anyone out there is expert in valuing health and can sort of translate 9,600 more walking and cycling trips into pounds and pence to help sort of justify and move this forward, please do. But we know that with more people walking and cycling, it's going to have a better health impact than the historic solution.
Fantastic. And just while I pass over to Jenny, if people have already been sharing questions and comments, so if you do have any questions or comments, please do share them. I'm starting to gather them so they'll be ready for the question and answer session after Jenny. But first of all, Jenny, you've obviously worked a lot both in this area of sustainable transport and also around Chippenham. I'd like to pass over to you for your insight, your response to what Chris and David have said. Thank you. You're on mute at the moment, Jenny. Just
Right, is that working? Yeah. So I've been thinking about this, and I thought, well, I'll put it in the context of having just come back from Sweden on a holiday, but also to visit family. And I visited, I think, 3 very large new housing developments. And I have to say that it really, when you go to Sweden, where these new housing developments are modern apartments, they are built around sustainable transport completely. So, and they're built at reasonably high density. I think it's blocks of about 6 stories high. But the whole land use formula, the way that the place is laid out, is about sustainable transport. So it's as though the planners, well, I know they have because I've been reading up about it, look at the expansion of a town, not just from the housing point of view in isolation, not just from, cars, driving access. They look at it really holistically and they say, so how are people going to live? Well, we want them to live healthily, so they provide a system of streets with very wide cycleways on both sides, segregated, wide pavements. There are trees. There are parks integrated with the flats. Parking is out of the way, mostly underground, and apparently not many people want cars. And this model has been adopted particularly in Uppsala, which is a university town, with a university rather like well-known, like Oxford. And it's the way that they've expanded Uppsala has been so successful that there is very little traffic actually in the town and the surrounding area. And I was thinking, this has given all the benefits that we talk about, the healthy communities, the biodiversity has, which has been carefully planted, things have been planted and tended to, the health aspects, the local economy with shops and services right within the new area, so you can walk to them, integrated right in, not out on the ring road. So they have done it, basically. And it got me thinking about, why can't we do this in England? And I can't quite explain why we can't. Oh yes, by the way, the bus system is absolutely excellent with modern electric buses, really frequent to the point you just go and there's a bus. You really are, it's brilliant. So why can't we do this? And certainly in Oxford, and I know the Oxford area quite well from when I was a student. I think the first thing that fascinates me is that there is no land use plan for the whole of Oxfordshire, right out to Didcot, Abingdon, Wallingford. As far as I know, nobody has planned the place in its entirety, taking into account biodiversity, landscape, local economy, housing, etc., etc. There seems to be an immediate obsession with roads. And when you go to Oxford and you go to the A34, you look at the A34, out of town, American style development seems to be the order of the day. So my impression with Oxford is that the local authority seems to have become obsessed with roads, and they're confused about whether they are about strategic connections, distant connections like the A34 for lorries and long distance traffic, or whether they're about the local area. And I don't think they've thought it through. That's my impression. That I don't think there's really a plan that integrates housing with all the other aspects of growing a place. So that's my conclusion. And certainly working, as I have done in the high-tech industry, those people who work in computer development in biotech and so on, I don't think they want to move to an area which is entirely dominated by roads and traffic. Certainly when I visited other parts of Europe, science parks and so on, it's not like that. People realize that modern employees of high-tech companies and so on, they do like cycling, they do like using public transport, and they don't just want to exist in an environment that emulates part of the freeways around Boston, where I've also lived. Anyway, so that was one response. I do think the Create Streets work has been brilliant, and I just hope that it can be carried through, and local politicians and national politicians convinced that there is a different way of doing things from road building. I don't know, I better not go on for too long, but I've got further comments on that if people are interested, particularly about the possibility of a metro for the whole area around Chippenham, Bath, Melksham, the entire area. It's expanding very fast. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but yeah, that's my thoughts so far. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jenny. It's I'm sure we're going to be booking our holidays to Sweden now. I gather it's been
well, it's just very, very different. It's a different way of doing things. It is much more sustainable, you know, compared to all the stuff we're building here.
Fantastic. Well, please do share some questions. We've got quite a few already, but the more the merrier, and maybe some of the discussion will prompt some more questions. And besides the question I posed at the start about how do we get more modal shift, but also more housing delivery, given that many of the existing proposals are, you know, as all of you have said, kind of focused around road schemes rather than public transport. There's a couple of other themes that might inspire some questions. First of all is the kind of the supply side approach. This is, I think, David's great phrase about how do we supply the public transport before people start occupying new homes, rather than, I think there's one example in Cambridgeshire where next to Camborne there's a new development and there's been proposals for a busway for ages as Bourne Airfield, and it's just been approved, and still the bus proposals are kind of moving along very, very slowly. A second area, we've mentioned the NPPF. Any questions around that? I'm sure some of the people watching will be having to do consultation responses. All the panelists have raised the difficulty of changing culture in councillors, and that's something that seems very important. And then finally, perhaps around the public realm and active travel. You know, we hear a lot about the benefits of walking and cycling, but many new developments are simply the public space seems to be kind of car parks, not somewhere you want to let kids run free or necessarily want to walk and cycle through. So yeah, please do add some questions. Now over to the questions that have been asked already. I'm going to start with one from Gerald Kells, I think from the West Midlands. And he's pointed out that the new methodology for housing in the National Planning Policy Framework doesn't just introduce mandatory targets, it pushes housing to less accessible areas, such as, you know, away from the major urban areas to more rural authorities. Now, do the panel see that as interlinked, the push to increasing targets and shifting the duty to kind of deliver those targets to more rural areas?
Hi. So this is interesting because I've just been looking at this with the aid of the Litchfield Consultants Interactive Map, which you can find out what new housing targets are for any particular local authority. And you can't see this because it's on paper. But what I've done is I've taken a map which gives a DEFRA score for each local authority, telling you whether it's rural, very rural, urban, partly urban, and so on. So they classify it. And when you superimpose the new proposed National Planning Policy Framework housing targets on this map, what you see is that an awful lot of new homes are now going to go, even more than last time, a lot more, to places which are rural and have got very, very poor public transport. You know, and it's hard to know how this is going to work. But of course, those numbers, those targets, have been calculated using an incredibly simple algorithm, and they do not in any way take into account things like the availability of brownfield land in a given local authority, whether it's rural, whether it's got a good transport system, whether it's got even jobs. So yes, this is a great problem that, you know, all kinds of rural places are going to be forced to accommodate tens of thousands of new homes in their local area, local plans. And it's hard to see how this can be done sustainably. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris or David. Do you have any comments on that?
I can add something else. That the only thing I can say that could be done, if you are going to build like that, then you are going to have to put in new metro systems that reach out from a focus urban area. For example, you know, if you've decided that you're going to build all around Bath, then the Bath area needs a new metro that reaches out to some of these rural places that you're now going to build up. And certainly, you know, I've seen this in the Netherlands and other places, but it requires that coordination, that integration and holistic approach, which seems to this country finds very difficult. But that would be one way of doing it, I suppose. Otherwise, we are just looking at another layer of car-based, urban sprawl around an awful lot of towns, both small and large. You know, we do need to do it differently. So, yeah.
I was gonna, I realize I'm shaking my head to comment on that one. Actually, do definitely want to reinforce Jenny's point. I mean, I haven't sort of looked in detail at all the numbers. It's not really, you know, I think we cover enough things at Great Streets. It's not really my kind of expertise. I know Jenny's really all over that. If they're coming, if this number of homes is going to be coming, it makes the need to become town builders and to be looking at the existing towns or existing places to expand them in the way that we looked at with Chippenham, but also if you're doing that for Bath or for Bristol or Swindon or wherever, you can actually dial that up, because, you know, our Chippenham example was it wasn't high density. It was sort of, you know, what we refer to as gentle density, which can, you know, flex between 3 and 8 stories, and you can get gentle density up to 200 dwellings per hectare if you look in, you know, large swathes of London. It makes the need to change the pattern development really, really important. And then, as you mentioned, focusing on the supply side of transport. And I think that's what a lot of the campaigners and experts potentially on this call, I can see some very good questions in the chat from them as well, to really communicate how public transport, active travel, sustainable transport is growth transport, if that makes sense. It's a much better way of moving people around efficiently and of delivering economic growth, whereas also because you do not need as much land. And if land is finite, unless you're Singapore, then really we need to be looking at how we, like you said, integrate the transport and go quite hard on the supply side of new metros and really predictable, reliable, fast public transport that won't get bogged down in sort of congestion, and can really sort of start to build up that reinforcing cycle of high density, predictable transport, better local economic growth. And if you're going to use and if you're going to do that, you can also do it in a greener way, because it's using less land and preserving some of that land for nature, farming, solar panels, whatever it might be.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Just briefly, yeah, I think the question partly is we talk about we, and the question is who is actually making these decisions. In Oxford, we have the additional problem that we have both the district and the county, with the districts being responsible for housing supply. We spent 2 years developing a joint strategic spatial plan, which was kind of hinted at as being fairly essential by Jenny. That fell apart when various of the districts couldn't agree where the houses went. The JSSP had options. Should it be as much as possible in the city? Should we be developing around growing towns like Bicester and Didcot? Should there be a little in each village? Or, of course, should we go for transport-related homes? But the failure to agree on that and the polarization. But I think one of the problems is that people, in many cases, are far more interested in stopping housing coming to them, right, than actually saying, well, how do we solve the housing crisis?
So it's a great point.
Within that, we have the climate crisis and the nature crisis as well, if we don't have that strategic planning. But when I say we, at what level? There's talk in the questions about regional, bringing back some kind of regional planning, which may be the answer.
Well, we'll come on to those questions. There's quite a lot now to get through. I think, yeah, one important thing there is that by shifting from the major urban areas where, places like London, transport and spatial planning are integrated, to the more rural areas where they're not, that certainly is a problem. So when I come on now to issues of finances, John M has mentioned that Leicestershire County Council is now in a dire financial position because it supported roads around the north and east of Melton Mowbray and has had to find missing millions. So how, panelists, can councils reduce financial risk while increasing housing delivery? And that's my question on the back of what John said. So I was trying to turn it into a question.
How can they increase? Sorry, say that again.
So how can councils reduce the financial risk while at the same time increasing housing delivery? We've got the example of Leicestershire, funding road schemes to try and unlock housing, and then finding, costs have increased and they're having to pick up the tab when they've probably got lots of other funding constraints, like, social care and education on their budgets.
I don't know. I mean, it just depends. I mean, this business of building wanting to finance new roads, to open up land for housing. I mean, I've seen many cases where this hasn't worked just recently. I know around Trowbridge that there's been a bypass wanted now for maybe 20 or 30 years. And it just ends up with gridlock, with Persimmon Homes refusing to finance the increasing costs of this bypass, which ostensibly was going to give access to their big new housing estate of 2,700 houses. So I don't think that the local authority realised that they were taking any risk in giving permission to this new housing estate. But as the road has become too expensive and the housing hasn't been built, so all the developers have come in citing the 5-year housing land supply or something, and are now building all over the place and getting permission because this other thing has stalled. Anyway, I don't know, the financial risk, I don't believe that the Wiltshire Council really realised what it was. And I wonder, as this keeps happening, whether there'll be less interest in roads for homes, and maybe people will look to a different model. I don't know. What do you think?
David, that sounds like a segue into your work in Chippenham.
Yeah, I've already unmuted. I think yes, and actually, probably worth talking about some of our work for local authorities in design codes, which might seem a million miles away, but also stick with me. So, we've been working on a bunch of design codes up and down the country, Surrey to Cheshire, Lichfield, all over the place. And these are largely what are known as area-based design codes, which basically is about bringing certainty for developers as to what streets and buildings they will be asked to build when they put in a planning application, when they buy some land. So the theory behind it for a large space of the UK is there's a lot of money out there. It's all in land. We have, enormously inflated land values in the UK. I don't know if inflated is the right word, but high land values because we have such high demand. And we also have invested so much in some regions, around London, that we've got this, amazing economy around London and a really, really low supply of houses for people to access that jobs market. So when someone, if we want to get together and buy a piece of land around London, we'll have essentially developers produce a residual land value model where they say, right, 20% profit, that's what we're allowed. That's almost like a sort of industry agreement. And everyone pretty much talks between 15 and 20%. Then you'll look at how much it's going to cost. Could be a few percent in terms of bricks and mortar, obviously a chunk in labor. All the remainder, and it can sometimes be a really big chunk, is how much can I pay for the land to outbid my other big PLC house builder? And without predictability and certainty on what infrastructure I'm being asked to build as a house builder, I want that amount to be able to be paid for land to be as high as possible, because otherwise I'm going to get outbid by someone else who's going to be squeezing their margins to win that piece of land, because these big industries, clearly they need land to sort of continue building homes. So with design codes, it's seeking to provide certainty on build costs for the buildings, on the design codes, gentle density, whatever it might be, the ones we're involved in, usually slightly fewer roads and tighter streets and more cycling, more greenery. That will just get factored into this. Now, I think it's really necessary there's an opportunity for transport to do the same thing, which is to say, if you are going to build 2,000, 3,000 new homes, you need to be hitting these outcomes in terms of modal share. Who sets those? I personally think it's probably best set locally. They tend to know their areas best. So if you're Greater Manchester or West Midlands or whoever, probably in most of those transport strategies, there'll be a modal share target. So your development needs to show how you're either hitting that or exceeding that if you're trying to bring up the average. So once you have that, it's about writing into, creating certainty for a developer that they know they're going to have to hit 30, 40, 50% mode share for sustainable, 60 for sustainable transport. If that happens, you'll suddenly see people paying a lot less for land and paying a lot more for extending rail links, for BRT, for this, for that. Basically, it's about moving some of that out of land and into infrastructure, and it's sort of a similar process to, I guess, what happened when you're creating some of the new towns like Milton Keynes, where they basically got an agricultural land value, gave an enormous amount of value to put into transport infrastructure, and I guess to sort of build stations. So I want to look at how can we do that for developments. How can we? It's a big change in terms of the system, but how can you also do that for individual planning applications to lock in through essentially land value, better transport. Sorry, I sort of went into a bit of detail, but I think it's a real opportunity to look at essentially the value that's in land to fund some of this transport as well.
And just on that, I think Graham Horner asked Jenny who owns the land in Sweden. I think, Jenny, you said that Uppsala, the town actually bought it, so maybe
they bought it, yeah, and then they developed it. It's such a different model, it's completely different. And I was looking at the density I've tried to estimate it from Google Maps, and within 100 square meters. You know, I just superimposed a square on a housing estate, one of the ones we visited. You get sort of 20 to 25 new homes in a sort of classic car-based housing estate around a market town. So there it's more like 100. And the individual flats, since I've been in them, are just very big compared to the homes that we're building as well. Anyway, that's just, but the ultimate thing is it's specified by the local authority, as is the case when I went to the Netherlands and went on a tour of I was taken on a tour by some of their spatial planners, and actually in the Netherlands they couldn't really understand when I kept talking about developers, and then gradually I realized, and I said, so who specifies everything here? Where do the cycle routes come in? How do you specify the pedestrian? What happens if the developers want to put a different kind? And eventually they said, look, I don't know who these developers are, but we draw up the plan and then we commission house builders to build according to our specifications. That is a very different way of doing things. But what I was going to say, which is really key, and this relates to high housing targets in rural areas, is that if you do want to do really good buses or really good new metro systems, or even trams, which of course in Europe is more common, you do need to coordinate the locations where you build along the route of the new transport infrastructure. And if you're going to coordinate it, you need control as a local authority. Now, unfortunately, in a local plan at the moment, there's a call for sites, and the sites offered up can be dotted around all over the place, and you've got to choose enough sites to satisfy your local plan target. So there's got to be another an idea that we build public transport networks in conjunction with site selection, and that is not something we're used to doing anyway. So that's another.
Well, that's
another
an interesting problem. We've got lots of great questions. Just want to kind of keep them coming. And keep them up the pace a bit. One. I think there's a few people being devil's advocates, but some good questions. I'd like to move on to those. Gerald Kells is referring to the new NPPF consultation, paragraph 114, that adopts a vision-led approach, but still talks about promoting sustainable transport rather than actually delivering. And Roger Geffin doesn't share David's excitement quite about vision-led planning, because it doesn't say that vision should be reduced on car use. Shouldn't that be clarified? And just to put my own spin on that, National Highways says its huge roads investment strategy is vision-led, the vision being ever bigger roads and ever more traffic, anything else being unimaginable. So, I mean, obviously vision-led is a positive step, but how do we make sure that it delivers a more integrated, sustainable future with fewer cars?
I'm happy to. No, I think Roger's absolutely right to not get carried away, and I think it's a very good point that this is, for me, this is a first step. The proposed change in vision led is almost, it feels like it's allowing us to have a different conversation. We might still have the wrong conversation, totally get that, but in areas, and firstly, it's imperative that local authorities adopt this. You know, it's all well and good it's being in the NPPF and DFT talking about vision-led, but local authorities are the decision makers. So when you have places like Oxfordshire, and I think Somerset as well, I think Surrey have got to decide and provide that more local authorities need to adopt it, and then it's about what is the vision with that local authority. What's the vision in their strategy? And that probably is a answer for people who are living there. And it's tended to be, if you look at Oxfordshire as well, it's tended to be that the voices trying to argue for a more sort of vision-led gender density growth based around more public transport has happened. But I almost see it as undoing the negative rather than sort of locking in the positive. So I think Roger is right in that sense, and it's probably about actually local residents, local campaigners being part of setting those visions locally. You're muted, Rafe, so I missed that. Sorry.
Jenny and Chris, do you have any insight there about if vision is a start, vision-led planning, what else might you want in the NPPF as a kind of a test, or is it simply up to local areas to work out what their vision should be?
I'll let Jenny deal with that.
Difficult question,
Well,
I know.
I think a lot of local authorities are pretty limited in what their vision can be at the moment, because you know, they haven't got the resources. The housing targets arrive, developers start their lobbying. You know, they're kind of processing the existing system. So having a vision and trying to impose that is difficult, I think, for a lot of local authorities. Probably easier for the big city areas. I think they've got more resources, and you know, they've got more power over planning and transport. But for your ordinary local authorities, I think they're struggling just to keep going. You know, I guess they could try and put a different vision in their local plan. But there's so many crazy barriers. Working across border is another barrier. So I mean, I think the NPPF needs to lead on this, actually, to help local authorities make progress. And at the moment, I think we're quite disappointed because it doesn't. So.
So I'm guessing was it 300 or 3,000 new planning officers that are going to be appointed? Not many of them will have vision as their main role.
They will have visions. I mean, a lot of young planners have got really good visions. It's just that, and I think they probably get quite disillusioned that they can't carry them through. But in a way, I think the government needs to speak to local planners to find out what the barriers are to carrying through a more modern way of doing things. Maybe it's been going on, but I don't know. So anyway, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Just very briefly, I think without the vision, we are pretty screwed.
Yeah.
You know, we need a clear vision of what we want. I'm not convinced that the local authority can deliver that vision on its own. And I think a concise, unwoolly visioning process done with environmental groups, civic societies, residents, and so on, to say this is where we want to be going. The vision also needs to reflect their wildly optimistic climate emergency declarations made 4 or 5 years ago that say how we're all going to be zero carbon by 2030 or whatever. And what are they going to do about nature? I think getting that vision in place, and I think the NPPF needs to be strengthened on that so that they do have a vision, and that vision has got some degree of statutory role and can't just be thrown to one side by economic development officers.
That's a worrying point. And I do wonder, given the move to kind of condense the local plan kind of timetables, maybe actually delivering and developing a genuine vision, you know, with different groups, as you've been saying, that might actually take a bit longer, particularly for the first time that you try to create or co-create a vision in a local area. So I'm going to move on to now another difficult question. KT or KTA has asked, is road building always wrong by default? What if a new road offers environmental, housing and public transport benefits in a town centre? And then another angle from John M there is a significant problem here is the focus on strategic roads and neglect of local travel. What do you think there? What should be the presumption? I mean, currently, certainly at the kind of the national level, there's a presumption in favour of road building via the national policy statement. Should there be a different planning test? Do we need a presumption against road building, or what would you suggest? Or maybe you need to differentiate between, you know, strategic road capacity and local roads, or maybe streets even. What do the panel think? That thorny question.
Who's going to do it?
Who'd like to start?
When you say I think that there needs the strategic versus local roads, I mean that's absolutely critical, and I think one of the mistakes we make is confusing the two and trying to build strategic roads by at the same time saying they're going to give local benefits, all kinds of nonsense. So I think you've got to differentiate between the two. And I think that roads, if you build a road as part of a sustainable town, a town that is assuming a completely new model of itself, oriented around sustainable transport, well, sure, you can shape it with busways on both sides. I mean, I have seen this in Europe, busways on both sides, wide cycling routes and pavements and trees. So that is a totally different kind of road, and you might build it and it might help open up a brownfield site and so on. But as for long distance strategic roads, I mean, it's not my expertise really, but I do think that the rationale for building them must be about long distance traffic and not opening up land for housing, as we've seen at so many places, including even motorway junctions made bigger to accommodate new so-called garden towns. I mean, this must be crazy. Counterproductive, really. So that's all I can say about that.
Maybe they need to provide for lots more trips to the gardening centres.
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
Green journeys.
It's out of town. I mean, road systems. I've always thought, living as I do in the Southwest, I see road systems as opening up a new American style, like living with everything moving out of town. And our town centres are not only dying, but there's less walking because there's less to go to. And people, my next door neighbour will say, oh, could you give me a lift to so and so? I can't walk there. And it's a new out of town retail area. So, new roads have that effect, but I don't know whether that's really qualified anywhere. I'd love to see some research on that problem. Yeah.
Right. Chris, you gave the example of what was kind of a local road possibly being extended to turn into a link to a motorway. Is there anything you'd like to kind of add on how do we distinguish what maybe is a local road versus one that's like a stealth kind of through route?
Well, I mean, yeah, what's the road for is the first question. And is it to allow better public transport, whatever? The size of the road, I mean, we have an interesting example. One of the other roads being proposed to the county, Watlington Relief Road, the cabinet member has repeatedly stated the speed limit on that road will be 20 miles an hour. But the engineers developed it for a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. And the design codes for these, as some people will know, are surprisingly different. So if we were saying, yes, actually, we do need some roads to connect, communities to allow the bus transport. But if we're talking about strategic roads or roads that can be upgraded to provide new high-speed links, then I don't see how that helps us get to net zero. We have to be serious about modal shift, and modal shift targets need to be in every plan. And if the only answer is a road, then let's make sure we get the road concise, public transport friendly, proper pavements, proper cycle routes, and let's prioritize those road users. Let's recognize the hierarchy.
A related kind of point from Colin Black is, should policy simply require new housing to be in locations that don't require significant investment in our highway infrastructure? David, what do you think?
Yeah,
there?
It's a really good question. We probably might have different views on it on the panel because there's who selects these sites. But I kind of going back to my previous too long answer, on design codes. If you set clarity and a rule for developers, whether it's council, whether it's private, whatever, that you need to do X to build these homes. If X is easier, X being sustainable development, let whoever's setting this vision in an area that already has good infrastructure, i.e. an existing town or city or whatever, that is going to be an easier place to build homes. If you, for whatever reason, you've bought land, or you're looking to buy land, or in somewhere different, and you're creating, maybe a new town, which is a hard thing to do, but we have done in the past, clearly, you're going to have to work harder for it. So the inference is you'll probably pay a lot less for the land, but you're going to have to really invest in this infrastructure. Might be Wiltshire Metro. You need a really big project, something like the DLR, to really and tube extensions to really hit that vision. And let's face it, these places are vision led. Talking about vision, yes, there are different visions, but it's basically saying is creating something that is absolutely not there before. Whereas we are currently living in a world of let's just optimize junctions. And I think that's the difference: is are you optimizing existing infrastructure versus if you're going to build somewhere that does not have any infrastructure, you're really going to have to fund and work hard to do that. But someone does need to give the developers that clarity of what's going to go in there. And just on the previous question, my kind of 2 pence is look at it through a lens of access. So stop, don't go straight through. Are we building a road? Or are we building light rail or rail, whatever? We're building towns here, or we're either building towns or extending towns or building bits of villages or cities. Just think of it through that lens and think about, if I build this, how do I get the most people to have the most access to jobs, shops, services, schools? And then whatever the answer is to that question, occasionally it's, sometimes it will be new streets, sometimes it will be rail, sometimes it'll be buses, sometimes it will just be, actually, we need to build a school here because it's really, really hard for us to get for this population to get to the school. So sort of the lens of access, I think, is really important.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, one slightly different question from Mark Morris. Do people have views on why developments in the UK tend to be either, 2, 3, or 4 floors, or instead like 10, 12, or even more? Why do we struggle so hard with kind of the gentle density of, 5 and 6 floor developments?
Good question.
We've got books on this. So firstly, I'd say dig into the Craig Street's archives. It depends where you are. It depends. Are you talking, you've got London Plan? Are you in different regional areas? But I'd say some of this is come down to viability. Some comes down to building regs. Some comes down to planning, which are all different things. So in London, it can be really hard because once you get to a certain height, you have understandable sort of safety features and access features such as lifts, and lifts are really expensive. So that can make it quite hard to get to your, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's the exact meterage of height, but once you get to a certain height, you need to put a lift in. The last London project, looking at lifts, I think it was about 80 grand. I'm sure that's probably doubled by now, but it's a lot. So that means that to get the viability for that lift, you then suddenly need to jump up a height. So that can be one thing. I think outside of London is probably a different paradigm, and a lot of that can sometimes, I just think, be the supply chain and what is built and what planning officers are used to and they will accept. So I think there's different sort of greenfield strategic land versus regen questions. And then the other one, it goes back to that land value, the sort of residual development model for a house builder, which is how much have they paid for the land? Because if they're competing and they don't think the height is going to be a cap, and you're talking about really a hot land area, then there's no code to say this is the height you can build. Clearly they'll try and outbid someone else for the land and then really try and push that height, because that's sort of the only way that someone can get access to that land. Go to France and you ask a question, you think about buying a piece of land, you just pull up the local code, it says you can build between 4 and 7 stories. Viability is done in about 10 minutes. It's not a sort of huge game. It's very, very clear. So that tends to make the mid-rise quite a bit easier in some of those areas.
That's interesting. Okay. Right. Any more? Any more questions?
Sorry, Jenny and Chris, do you have any views there?
David, I think David answered. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing I noticed is that the draft NPPF changes the kind of presumption of character, which not people worrying about the character around stations in suburban areas. If you start having these foreign continental looking 6-story kind of buildings, maybe that. And I see Graham Horner has asked also why we have fewer flats in the UK than the continent. Maybe it's this gentle density, and perhaps the changes in the NPPF could change that. Though I'm wondering how.
I'm not going to answer that question, but I think it's a different answer that might help that, which is, I think, let's just face it, we have too few developers in the UK. We have I think the most concentrated market. While there's mergers happening or happened or coming, and you've got 3 or 4 big developers, and they're really impressive in their model and their supply chain and their vertical integration, and how they sort of, for their shareholders, I think, do a pretty good job. We're talking here about like different solutions. We need a market to sort of have those different solutions, and that can include public sector as well, right? I'm just talking about like the supply of these of homes and of towns. I speak to so many developers that have these amazing solutions. They're all small. Small developers are fighting one of the toughest fights at the moment, because because of our discretionary planning system, if they lose one planning application, that might be all their risk finance gone, and they're borrowed, right? Because they've spent X million up front on this, they lose it, they're gone. So until we get to a way that we can help some of the SME developers thrive, and then you're going to have more of your Phoenix and Lewis, you're going to have more of your towns, you're going to have more of whoever, but I say whoever, like there's not many more. We're not going to be able to kind of get this sort of supply of mid-rise going. So yeah, I think it's linked.
That's a really interesting systems perspective, needing that kind of a different developer ecosystem. Thank you. I'm just there's a few more questions I want to just touch on that raise some different issues. Particularly, David Redgewell asks, what role for regional government and transport authorities under the Labour government? And I'd like to add in one bit of detail I picked up in the draft NPPF. It talks about a kind of a larger than local approach, some sort of strategic planning, which sounds really positive. But then I looked at the detail, and it talks about strategic in terms of housing markets, which for me is, it's a bit bigger perhaps than some local planning authorities. It's not necessarily the kind of the regional scale you might want if you're going to deliver kind of new metro systems, or tackle some of the problems about journeys across local authority boundaries that Jenny has mentioned. So what do you all see as the kind of what the role that Labour's proposing, and maybe what might you want instead if it's not exactly what you'd like to see?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's absolutely essential from a public transport point of view, and from a local economy, to cement together a whole area of expansion with a really good public transport network is absolutely essential. And I mean, one of the problems I can see is if we're going to expand a lot of rural areas, I mean, just in the southwest, I can't remember the exact number, but I think, you've got Somerset, Wiltshire, Dorset, then you've got Bath, then you've got Bristol. So this goes right across a whole area. Now, the question is, how do you get rural authorities who have part of their area in close proximity to somewhere like Bath or Bristol? So they are essentially part of the same, not just the travel to work area, but they are, there's overlaps. How do you get them to cooperate? I mean, this is anyway, it's just, I don't know with other parts of the country whether the same problem exists, but cross-boundary planning and transport, certainly in the southwest, is extremely difficult. And it's not helped by the fact that the housing targets are aimed at individual local authorities, who then seem to have an almost unsaid agreement that they won't annoy anybody. They just have those housing targets to themselves, and they won't negotiate much with next door as to whether it's the best thing to build them here or maybe somewhere else. So we need some way of choosing the right places to build in the right way around the right transport that goes across local authority boundaries. And it could be a sub-region, it could be a region, I don't know, but that is absolutely required. Otherwise, it's disjointed. Nothing holds together. It's not going to work. So yeah, but I don't know we don't know how this is going to happen, or whether the government does intend some kind of different way, dealing with these more rural authorities with a lot of development. I don't know. Anyway.
David and Chris, any final comments?
Well, one last point, and I'll let David finish. The government says it gets net zero. It recognises the need for net zero. It recognises the need for the 2030 biodiversity target. It cannot do those without ramping up the NPPF, without recognising that how we deliver transport, how we deliver planning has to reflect that.
Yeah.
I go back to the Reid and Rayner letter that says these priorities are not one above the other. How they do them is up to, they've got bright people, but they will only do it if we really say something has to change. The mindset in the councillors is also the inertia in the developers who try and convince governments that what people want is a little patch of land with a semi. It's time for change.
Fantastic point. And I think also your slide about nature is important, because it's not just the climate targets that are set to be missed, but also the nature recovery and the air quality targets that are set to be missed are very important. David, any concluding views there?
I feel like I've spoken enough. We've covered a hell of a lot of ground, so it's a risk of sort of going over everything. I think just whatever we can do to emphasise integrated transport and to bring in certainty for house builders on what their obligations are with transport, I think is exciting. And to just remember that, yes, finances are really tight, but there's a lot of money in land, and the more mechanisms we can look at to move some of that money away from the land to transport infrastructure, I think is probably worth looking at for the next few years.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, David, Jenny, and Chris, for some fantastic presentations, responses, and discussion. And also, thanks very much to all of you viewers for being here, and for such a great range of thoughtful and insightful questions. I'm going to try to make sure that this seminar ends on the dot of 1:30, in case you're either trying to rush off to your lunch or to your NPPF consultation responses. But please do follow fit. We do have kind of regular webinars on other projects that kind of we've funded with such kind of fascinating conclusions as the ones you've heard from Create Street and the Oxfordshire Alliance. So thank you again for coming. And with that, we may be able to share the presentations that have been, but otherwise do check out the FIT website, Create Streets, Transport for New Homes, and the Oxfordshire Alliance from Chris. But with that, I'd like to end and have a great rest of the day, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everyone.
So what do I